Thank you. Okay, so Gay Poz Sex, a community-based counseling intervention for HIV-positive gay and bisexual men. Mostly it's just been gay men who've been meeting with us. So the actual name of the program is GPS, Gay Poz Sex Finding Your Own Way. So GPS is kind of like the GPS locating system, if you're using a map, and about guiding people into finding their own location of their choice. So when we came up with Finding Your Own Way, we kind of nailed it with that description, because it really is about what the individuals themselves want. And so the way we describe the program to guys in plain language is a sexual health program for gay men who are HIV positive to help decrease risk and improve sex and sexual health. In researchese, or research language, it's actually described as a pause prevention intervention for MSM engaging in UAI and UAR with partners of unknown or serodiscordant status. I know it sounds hot, yeah. So we tend not to talk that way in group. So this is a wonderful team of people who helped to develop the program, and I'd say at least half of the guys are HIV positive. And so what are we doing? It's an HIV prevention for HIV-positive gay men. It's part of a community-based research project. We're using the theoretical model of information, motivation, and behavioral skills. And the implementation model that we're using, so kind of the tool that we're using, is motivational interviewing. If you haven't heard of motivational interviewing, think guided active listening. It's very much like active listening in terms of always sticking to open-ended questions. We do a lot of reflections. Reflections are kind of the heart of motivational interviewing, because it's really the person's own thoughts and words and desires that we're reflecting back to them. It really is about what they want to do. And the guided part is really important. In terms of guiding, we guide towards change, and change is whatever they say they want to change, and we guide away from resistance, and the resistance is what they say they're struggling with. So although it's offered in a group format, the program is a really individual, very personal project, very personal program. The advantages of it being done as a group is that you get to witness other guys going through the same process that you are, and you get to see that you're not alone in your struggles. Oops, I think I forgot something. And oh yeah, so the facilitators are peers. So, and that's an important part for this program. So it's important that we identify ourselves as gay men who are HIV positive. And a lot of the reflections, when you get into complex reflections, you're kind of trying to guess where the person is going when they're talking about their own lives, to try and get them to a bit of a deeper level. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into kind of the heart of it. And right now it's being administered out of the AIDS Committee of Toronto. So we use the trans-theoretical model, and it's called this because it cuts across other models. And it's really important, the important part of this is the stages of change theory. So, and so we teach this as part of the program, and we talk about it. We try to be as transparent about what we're doing as possible with the guys, and that's something that we've learned over doing a different number of groups. So we did 2 groups year before, and those were just pilot groups, really just putting the program together, figuring out what it was we were doing. And we're currently in our 5th official group of offering the program. And what we've learned along the way is we have to be upfront about what we're doing and let them know what's coming. So we tell them we're using motivational interviewing. We tell them we're really going to be talking about sex and sticking to the topic of sex and sexual health. We let them know that it's going to be personal, it can be really emotional for some guys, and that we're going to be supporting them through that process, because we found out a lot of stuff comes up when we're doing this. So the important part of the stages of change is that when it comes to looking at change, people often come in at pre-contemplation, which just means they haven't really thought about doing any change. So the stages are about change specific. Contemplation is where you realize there's something going on and you want to make a change and you're thinking about it, but you haven't actually done anything yet. And then preparation is where you're actually trying new experiments in terms of changing behavior. So you're actually trying different things and figuring out what it is you want to do. And action is where you actually have a goal. So, okay, here you've identified the change, exactly what it is, and you have a really specific goal in mind, and you have some real clear strategies for what to do. You know what your triggers are, you know kind of how to avoid relapsing back to the old behavior. And then maintenance is something, means you've done it for about at least 6 months. It's going to depend on the individual. But maintenance is really about having strategies to make sure that you don't slip back into old behavior. And it takes a while. People have a lot of difficulty identifying what stage they're in. They tend to overestimate. So often you'll hear, I'm, in maintenance, and I'll say, well, you haven't used substances for a couple of weeks, and that's great. Maintenance is actually a stage that's further along. Or in terms of sexual health, it's like, okay, your goal was not to go to the bathhouse, and you haven't done that for a couple of weeks. It's you're moving towards action, but it's still more around preparation because the behavior is still new. So it's really trying to figure out where you are along that continuum. And we do have information sessions, the first two, and I'll go over that in a bit when I talk about it. So the IMB model involves information, motivation, which then affect behavioral skills, and in turn, hopefully, be sexual health behavior. From a research point of view, the way we're testing changes are we do a survey, a pre-program survey, post-program, and then a 3-month follow-up. And the survey is really specific to sexual behavior and looking at scales of depression and other standardized testing. And we explain to the guys, this is very specific about condom use, sexual behavior, who you're doing it with, that kind of thing. But when it comes to the program, we look at sex and sexual health holistically. So it's everything that impacts sex and sexual health. So it's not just about where you put your penis. It's about how you feel about yourself, how you feel about other people, your interactions with other people, and everything that's impacting those interactions. So it's really up to the individual to decide what those things are. And we just let them know that the surveys are part of the research part of it. But when we're doing the program, we really want to hear about what's actually going on in your life. So the GPS program. So session 1, so it includes 7 2-hour sessions once a week. And so in total, we have 14 hours, and we're hoping we're going to take people from pre-contemplation, where they haven't even thought about making a change, to at least preparation, where they're testing out new behaviors, trying to think of new ways to improve their sexual health, and if we're really, really lucky, into action, where they have a goal, a really specific goal about how they want to make improvements about their sexual health. So we do talk about STI transmissions and standard information, which then is all available in a booklet. The first two groups are really getting to know each other. We also do a sexual health survey, which was suggested by one of the people in the team, David Ho, who said, you guys are offering this program, but you need to talk about the good stuff about sex and the fun stuff. And so we actually asked them to describe their sexual heaven or their sexual ideal. And asking people the first night they come into a program to describe their sexual ideal can be a little intimidating. And what we do is we give them this assignment, we give them a few minutes to think about it, and then the facilitators will actually leave the room and just let the guys talk about it. And we explain, there's no wrong way to do this, there's no right way. You can sit here and say nothing, and that's totally fine, or you can be as graphic as you like about what your sexual ideal is, and that's totally fine as well. The guys, when we give the exercise, tend to be really nervous and anxious, and when we come back 5 minutes later, they tend to ask for more time. They could you guys leave the room? We actually want to keep talking. The program doesn't allow for that because it's pretty concise in terms of, it's packed in terms of what we hope to accomplish, but it allows them to just get a comfort level with themselves about actually talking about sex and what sex means to them. And then the next week, we look at HIV disclosure and the law. And what we're finding is guys on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of their stress about this law and how it's impacting them, rate themselves often at a 10. So there's a lot of fear when it comes to the law. And we're actually finding it difficult to get program participants, and especially initially starting out. So part of the criteria is to be over the age of 18, identify as a gay man, and have had sex within the last 3 months, unprotected anal sex within the last 3 months. And often when I ask this question on the phone, there'll be a long pause. And then the person will either say, okay, or they'll say, no, I can't. And I know that that long pause means that they're just deciding whether or not they can trust me. And it's because of this law that a lot of the people are afraid to come forward and to actually talk about what's going on out there for them. So this is definitely something that's been getting in the way and causing a lot of stress for gay men. And another part of this, we also look at stress this week in other areas. And some of the things the guys talk about that are important to them are body image. And a number of the guys, especially the ones who are getting older, talk about erectile dysfunction as being a problem. Substance use is pretty common in terms of its impact. And homophobia. And just, old fears that come up for people, as well as disclosure and feeling comfortable with disclosure, and also how to do it. So disclosure is really about your ability to communicate. So kind of why it's such an ineffective tool, because it's only as good as your ability to communicate. And what we've been finding is that a lot of the guys struggle with communication when it comes to having sex, which is why a lot of them are deciding to opt out and go to the bathhouse where you don't have to talk. You don't have to communicate at all, and you can still get sex. It's not their preferred desire for what they want to do, but it's like a fallback plan for a lot of the guys when it comes to fear around disclosure. So sessions 3 to 7 is when we use the motivational interviewing. And so that's helping to identify each participant's goal. And it's about resolving ambivalence. So it's areas in your life where you're feeling two ways about something. So yeah, I'm going to the bathhouse and there's lots of partners, lots of sex, and I'm also not getting the intimacy that I'm looking for. So it's exploring what does that ambivalence mean to the person. And then looking at experimenting with new strategies as we go along and implementing strategies to achieve their goals and identifying strategies to maintain their progress. So week 3 is where the real work all begins, and it really starts with looking at something called the Decisional Balance. So one of the things we give to the guys on week 1 is a sexual diary that breaks down the sexual behavior into how were you feeling before sex, how were you feeling after sex, and what was your goal or what did you actually hope to achieve when you went out looking for sex that time. And some of the guys fill it out and they find it's helpful, it helps them to identify patterns of their behavior. Other guys refuse to take any of the material out of the room where it's provided, and for good reasons. It really became clear to me one week when one of the participants said, okay, on week 1, you gave me a sexual diary, and on week 2, you gave me a disclosure pamphlet that basically said I could go to jail, and suddenly my sexual diary looked like evidence. And that became real clear to me why people aren't going to be writing down what it is that they do, because there is a lot of fear out there. And so in week 3, we actually then start talking about, what is in your sexual diaries. Up until then, we kind of handed it out. Are you having any trouble filling it out? Do you have any questions? But week 3 is when we actually ask what's in it. And each of the guys will share as much as they're comfortable sharing, and then we ask for a volunteer to do a decisional balance. And so the decisional balance is a motivational interviewing tool that looks at breaking down the behavior. So this is an example of the sexual behavior diary. So it's kind of when did it happen, the time, where, what was the activity, what did you actually do, what was going on before. Rate your stress 1 to 10 afterwards. For this guy, he was stressed at an 8 before, and having sex helped reduce his stress. And he was just looking to be with other men, and because he was horny, was kind of how he put it. And then we start with the decisional balance. And what's good about the decisional balance is, first, we have them identify their current, it's a sexual habit or sexual behavior here. Last week when we did this, we're in the middle of doing a group, so we were at week 3 last week. So the first participant described his current behavior as indiscriminate sex. And the first thing we do is then look at what's good about that behavior. And so for him, what was good about indiscriminate sex was lots and lots and lots of sex. And really hot sex and long-lasting sex. And yeah, he was quite impressive in terms of how much sex he was having and how much he enjoyed it. And that was great. And then we look at what's not so good about it. And what was not so good was he actually felt that he was wasting a lot of time and could have been spending that time better and doing other things, because 17 hours in a bathhouse was time that he could have actually been doing things that might have been more important to him. And then we have them look at what's not so good about making a change. And at this point, we don't ask them to identify what the change is. We just ask them to talk about what makes change difficult or what makes it a challenge. So what are the challenges? For this guy that looked at indiscriminate sex as his behavior, the challenge was just knowing how to communicate. So a lot of the reasons he was using the bathhouse was he had trouble in social situations just communicating, whereas when it came to sex, he knew how to do that really well, and it didn't involve a lot of communication at the bathhouse. So a lot of it was just learning how and where to go and have dialogue with other men. And then what are the hopes? And for this guy, his hopes were to actually meet somebody, not to be in a monogamous relationship. This was a man who had been married before and had a child, and he came out at a later age. And for him, he really just wanted to still be having fun and have more than one partner. But he did want a partner. He wanted somebody that he could have meaningful dialogue with, somebody that they could share some things in common, do some things together, but also have fun. And then we actually have them identify what the behavior is. And for the guy we were talking to last week, his was to just start by cutting down his visits to the bathhouse, and just in terms of how much time he was spending there. And then that was for the purpose of giving him more time to look at other ways he could look at meeting men and having dialogue with them in a more meaningful way. One of the good things about this tool is the second participant that week described his current behavior as sexless. I'm not even masturbating anymore. I'm so fed up with sex. I've stopped going out. I'm no longer meeting guys. I don't ever want to meet guys again. I no longer trust guys. I'm just sexless. And so we start off by asking, what's good about that? What's good about being sexless? And because people do everything for a reason, and it's important to explore both the good and the bad. And it was really challenging to help this guy through this exercise, because he had reached a point where he wasn't trusting himself. And it took a while for that to come out. And his challenge was actually identifying who he was. And his hopes were to just get his behavior back in line with his values of trust and respect and responsibility. And when I say emotional stuff comes up, I'm not... It can be really heavy. It's not unusual for trauma to be mentioned. Often the challenges are dealing with past trauma and sexual abuse as a child, and we're seeing a fair bit of that. And so really deep issues come out. And the advantage of using motivational interviewing is it starts off at a surface level. So what's good about having sex usually starts off of, well, I got off. And what we do is ask open-ended questions. Well, what was good about getting off in that situation? Well, I was able to go out. Well, what was good about going out and getting out of the house? Well, I was feeling lonely, I was feeling isolated, and it just takes it deeper and deeper and deeper in terms of what does it actually mean. And when you do a really good complex reflection, where you guess really what you hope you think you're hearing from the person, you get immediate feedback. You know if you're right or wrong, because the person will say, yes, that's exactly right, that's exactly what I'm trying to talk about and what I'm trying to say. And so you know. And if you get it wrong, they'll tell you. They'll be, no, that's nothing even close to what I'm trying to say. And then you have the opportunity to correct it. And so at the end of doing the decisional balance, it's all up at the front on this whiteboard. often the guys will take pictures of it with their cell phone so that they can have it for their own information. But it's their information, it's their stuff. And what was really helpful for me doing this program was, I remember at the end of it, the values of motivational interviewing are autonomy, collaboration, and evocation. So autonomy, you're respecting that the individual is the expert in his life, and that's the way it should be. Collaboration, you're there to work with him. You're not there to fix him. There's nothing wrong with him. And all you're doing is evoking from him rather than educating. You're just getting him to talk about his experiences. And it really struck home for me one day when I was standing there. We finished the Decisional Balance, and I was looking at it, and I thought, oh my God, this man's life is so stressful, so extreme. I'm not sure how he's managing to cope at all. I don't see any solutions. And then when I looked at in his eyes, and he was looking at his own decisional balance, and what I saw in his eyes was actually some clarity and some hope. And I kind of got it then, that, you know, I'm not there to fix anybody. I'm there to just work with them, to just be collaborative and to offer them a process. My co-facilitator often says, we're providing a process, but all the content is provided by the participants. And that's what makes this individual and unique to each person, and allows them to look at, you know, what change did they want to make around improving their own sexual health. The next few weeks after that, we look at, you know, what are your greatest hopes and fears. We break it down a little bit more in terms of defining a concrete goal. Often the decisional balance will bring up values. You know, I want to be happier. I want to have less stress. And we help them break it down into how are you actually going to do that. And the week after that, we look at the readiness to change. So we look at, you know, you've identified a goal. How confident are you in your ability to work on this? And that way we're able to see areas where they may need support around developing some extra skills, around communication, and also how important is this goal to you. So, you know, in terms of readiness, if it's highly important and if you've got good confidence, great. And if not, then how are we going to work on the confidence? And if it's not an important goal, then is this what you really want to be working on? And we look at the readiness ruler. We also have been able to, now that we've gotten better at delivering the program, we're getting further along and actually taking people all the way from pre-contemplation to action, and even doing some role-playing. It was interesting, when we first started the program, we thought, oh, you know, we'll give them the decisional balance as a take-home exercise, and they can do it. And what ended up happening was they couldn't. And it wasn't that they didn't want to, it was literally that they couldn't look at themselves. And after they saw it being facilitated, the guys started asking, you know what, I like what I just saw, I want to do this exercise, and I want you to help me to do it. And they actually started asking us to facilitate the exercises. And so what we realized was that we had to facilitate each individual, each participant through the decisional balance in order for it to be meaningful for them. And that was because they were actually asking for it, which kind of took me by surprise. And it was kind of nice to see men asking for support when they needed it, because that was something I wasn't seeing happen very often. And when we've been doing role-playing, there was one young gentleman who he had identified that he wanted to use condoms more often, and his struggle was with disclosure. And he got better at, kind of through practice, feeling more comfortable with disclosure, but he still had trouble being assertive about demanding the use of condoms. And so we did a role play where and he was often interacting with older guys, so I was the older guy, kind of coming on to him and suggesting that, you know, we bear back and not use a condom. And he was supposed to then be allowed to say what he wanted, and he was given permission in the role play to say what he wanted. So what was interesting was when I said, you know, come on, let's go have fun. You know, we're both HIV positive. You know, you disclosed, that was great. So let's just have fun. We don't need to worry about condoms. And his response was, okay, let's go. And I was like, what? Part of me was like, okay, you didn't understand it. That's not what was supposed to happen. And another part of me was, is this how easy it could actually be to just pick up a young guy? what was interesting was I said, let's try this again. And this time, if you're having trouble saying what you actually want to say, my co-facilitator is going to help you. So you're going to have support available. And when we did it the second time, in the role play, when I suggested going and, barebacking, knowing that he had support available empowered him enough. He had the words. He then knew exactly what to say. He just stuck to his guns and, no, I'm using condoms because I want to protect my own health. And he was assertive. He was able to do it. So there's something about not just having permission, but knowing that you have support when it comes to actually working on a goal and then being able to follow through with it. And the same scenario played out for another role play where my co-facilitator was playing the party guy. The participant had trouble when his friends would call and say, let's go party, which meant using drugs, and then he'd end up at the bathhouse. He'd have trouble saying no. Same thing happened. My co-facilitator, was like, hey, let's go have fun, come on, and we're going to have a good time. You've worked hard all week, let's just go out, you deserve it. And his response was, okay, at this point I'd be saying yes because, I'm believing that. And when we said, okay, Rick will be there to support you, we'll do the role play again, and if you run into trouble, you've got support and he can help you. And at that point he had no trouble just saying no in that role play and saying, no, here's why I'm not going out tonight. Here's my reasons. I want to, protect my own health. I'm trying to make changes. I'm trying to cut down on my substance use, and I know where that's going to lead. And so it was interesting to see those dynamics play out and just really show the importance of feeling like you have support. And then in the final week of the program, what we look at doing is offering people referrals to other services. So when trauma has come up, we've been able to make referrals to some of the counselors at the AIDS Committee of Toronto. We also make referrals to the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health if the guys are dealing with substance use issues. And what's been really interesting is the dynamics within the group. So the group is small, 6 to 8 guys, because we are dealing with very intense personal issues, and it's jam-packed 14 hours. And what we found is we've been able to create a safe space where the guys are talking about what actually is happening in their lives. They're feeling comfortable and trusting with the facilitators and with one another. And one of the groups of 6, the second group actually, who originally we came together in the spring, recently invited me. They've been getting together on their own every couple of months, and they've invited the facilitators to come join them for their Christmas party that they're holding. So we're actually seeing the guys make real connections, and this was something that was completely unexpected. It wasn't something we were trying to achieve, but we are really happy that that's happening. So there's some honest communication that's happening with this program. And in terms of research, we're actually, so the first year it was the first steps 1 and 2 where we identified the need for a program and put together the program. We're currently working on step 3 in terms of assessing how the impact and what it's going to be through a CIHR grant. We're hoping, we've applied for another grant. We are actually hoping to take the program to Vancouver to do a follow-up study using, testing it against a standard of care. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of programs out there, so the standard of care will probably be a waiting list. To really prove it, this is one of the most rigorous research projects out there in terms of really trying to show that this is an evidence-based program and we are doing quality research and that we are implementing motivational interviewing the correct way. And so we are hoping to do a 3-year follow-up grant where we're going to bring it to Vancouver and Toronto and continue doing this program within the field of research. With the results we're seeing, I know my co-facilitator and I would like to just see this be available to all gay Poz men without the criteria of having had unprotected sex, and ultimately bring it to just all gay men, period, because we think there's something about this program that's meaningful for guys. It's not easy. One guy described it as, he said, it's like dental surgery. I feel healthier for having done it, but it was painful. And what's interesting is, it's a very personal, painful process for some of the guys, but every guy who starts the program is finishing the program. We've had just a couple of guys who only came to 1 or 2 meetings and then dropped out for health reasons, but other than that, every single man who started the program has finished it, and it's not an easy program. It's not... One of the hardest things in the world is to look at yourself, and that's what this program helps people do. And what's been great is, this is what the participants tell us afterwards, is their experience is increased social interactions both inside and outside of the program. So a lot of them have begun volunteering in other programs after taking it, as well as just keeping the connections that they've made within the program. Increased self-efficacy in their sexual health. So they actually start believing in themselves again. It seems to have broken that cycle of helplessness when it comes to making a change, and they're able to realize, you know what, I can take control of some aspects of my own sexual health and be responsible for them. And to be able to increase their sexual health risk assessment and sexual negotiation and how they do disclosure. One gentleman from the last group who, when I did the second surveys last week, was talking to him, and he said, you know, I realized that I was treating every guy out there as though he was already HIV positive. And what he realized now was that that's not reality. And he's still not comfortable with disclosure, but he realizes that he still has other options. There are people that he can get with who do know of his sexual status, so he doesn't have to worry about disclosure, and maybe he could have more of a fuck buddy rather than just using the bathhouse and feeling guilty and bad about himself afterwards. So it's really about making guys aware that they have options and they have choices. And increased use of community supports and the confidence to make healthier lifestyle choices. And they continually refer their friends to GPS. This program would have died before it even got out of the gate if we weren't getting referrals from past participants. So the guys who have graduated from the program are going out and telling their friends, look, you can go and you can trust this program, you can trust the facilitators, and at least half of each new group are referrals from past participants. And it's really what's keeping this program going, because the fear out there when it comes to disclosing what's really going on is still very, very high. And from a research perspective, the primary investigator's ecstatic because we're actually finding it's having an impact on people's behavior. We're actually seeing a decrease in the 3-month follow-up. We're not quite sure why, but there seems to be an increase in sexual activity during the program, perhaps because we're actually talking about sex. But 3 months afterwards, we're seeing a decrease in terms of unprotected anal intercourse, and the largest has been with partners of a negative or unknown status. And so we're really happy about that, because definitely in terms of POZ prevention, we are hoping that this is going to have an impact on the spread of HIV in the gay men's community, and it seems to be doing that. And I think that's about it. So thank you.